Hi there. So this topic this afternoon, and thanks for tolerating this much of the conference just to come listen to me speak. We're going to talk a little bit about the technical aspects of some of the changes in Joomla 4. If you've never had the misfortune of hearing one of my talks, they usually run a little more on the technical side. So I won't be offended if you get up and leave in the middle because I'm speaking over your head. I've also been told I need to not speak as fast as I normally do, so if you're listening in on translations, I apologize in advance. If you don't know me, my name is Michael Babker. Currently, I am Joomla's production department coordinator. Basically, that means I oversee all of the teams that are contributing to making Joomla get built, distributed, running 3% of the internet, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I have the dubious honor of having been a release lead for 4 release branches now, including the last 2.5 release and the current 3.8 releases. I've been a member of pretty much every maintenance team in the project for the last 5 years. Haven't broken as much as George, but we'll see what happens. Social media, tweet at me at mbabker for all of the good feedback. Tweet at George, DW1992 for all the bad feedback. And make sure you're using the hashtag JWC17. So for the first time in a little over 5 years, Joomla is finally putting out a new major version. A major version is basically the only time in the release cycle that we really get the opportunity to clean up some of our technical debt, get rid of some of the things that we've held on to for the sake of backward compatibility to make your lives easier, and bring forward some new innovative concepts and help build the next generation of our platform so that we can go for another 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years without needing to do another series of major releases, breaking changes, et cetera, et cetera. And we're going to talk about some of these new concepts that are coming into Joomla 4 today. You've heard a lot about Joomla 4 already through other sessions, probably tested the alpha by now. But I'm going to get into some of the nitty-gritty details that you're not necessarily going to find in the marketing product or what you're going to see in a lot of other folks' presentations. So the first thing I want to talk about here is backward compatibility. Anytime you hear about a major release in most platforms, you think backward compatibility is being broken. Oh no, it's the end of the world. And admittedly, with Joomla, that reputation's kind of deserved because we've had a couple of releases where backward compatibility wasn't really all of the greatest thing that was kept. Something that we started early, which is rare in Joomla, is documentation on backward compatibility breaks. And these are really more so just us having removed deprecated code. So if you follow the code practices, if you follow the changes that are happening in core, then most of what you're going to find on this page really shouldn't surprise you because it is all code that we have said at some point in the last 5 years, we're going to remove this at some point, probably 4.0. So, but by saying that we're making backward compatibility breaks, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going out of our way to be incompatible. In fact, with the extensions that I've developed and I've been working with both for the project and internally, my extensions are largely compatible today with the Joomla 4 code base, except for needing to adapt to the new template layouts. The code underlying still works. Even with the broken layouts, the extensions are still usable, which is a really good sign because that means when it comes time for 4.0 to be released, there's not going to be a major effort. You're not going to see a 1.5 to 2.5 style migration. You're not going to see the plethora of extensions get abandoned the same way that you saw in the past. Fine. I have to admit, this is the first time I've been told to stop talking. Is this the point where I ask how many Joomlas does it take to change a pair of batteries? Oh. Well, at this point, that would kind of really throw it off. Because I definitely couldn't do this like that and be done by 5. So, how's your days been? I don't do the whole filler content, entertain a crowd thing very well, so sorry. George ain't even in here. We can't blame him this time. You ain't missing much. We're waiting for a couple of batteries. Woo! All right, so back to whatever it is I was babbling on about. We are making BC breaks. We are making some internal improvements, but like I was saying, Joomla 4 and Joomla 3 are going to be so largely compatible at the API layer that really the majority of your effort for migrating extensions really should come into the UI layer. And if that's the worst BC break we have, then I think we're doing a pretty damn good job. So with that out of the way, we're going to talk about some of the new architecture concepts, some of the internal refactoring that we've been doing over the last year and a half. The first thing I want to talk about is the redefined event dispatching system. If you're already familiar with plugins, if you're a developer, you might be familiar with the JEvent and the JEvent dispatcher classes. Well, those classes have been completely removed, along with some other observer type behaviors and some sporadic classes, and everything has been refactored onto a single event dispatching platform now. And it makes use of the rewritten event dispatcher that we wrote specifically for the Joomla framework a few years ago. And this actually brings a lot of benefits to users and developers. First big thing I want to point out is even though we've ripped out the core of the old event dispatching system, there is a legacy compatibility layer in place. So there's zero change needed in plugins for 4.0. Come 5.0, that code's probably going to be gone, but that's years down the road. Don't worry about it right now. All of the new features in the event dispatching system are 100% opt-in. So you don't have to change your code until you basically drop Joomla 3 support, at which point you can start to look at these new features and integrate them. A couple of the key things that the new system brings forward is now you have the possibility to trigger immutable events. This basically means that the events are read-only. You can't manipulate the data in the events. So it's only reading data from the system and performing on that, versus right now there is no way to send out events and not have the data potentially be manipulated. Another of the big things is the event system now follows an object-oriented approach, which is pretty similar to most other PHP platforms today. So instead of having some randomly named arguments that you might have to go dig into the documentation to find, all events can now get dispatched using a proper PHP class representing that event. And you'll be able to very easily find information about that event because it is a properly defined PHP class API now. So instead of having random arguments, now you can have a get application call, and you know that an application is part of that event. We've done some internal work to the HTTP client. This is what enables your site to be able to talk to various third-party platforms, phone home to Joomla, be able to fetch updates, download updates, et cetera, et cetera. A large theme that you're going to see throughout the Joomla 4 presentations is we're using the framework code now, whereas throughout the last 5 years, the CMS and the framework have been kind of developed independently with largely similar code bases, but never put back together. So this is one of those areas where we put the two packages back together, and now that's less code that we as a project have to maintain, and it's just going to make everyone's lives easier. Another part of the changes that we've made specifically in the HTTP client is we're working, I'm not even going to ask. So another big changes is we're working on making our code at the framework level interoperable with other PHP projects. So you can use our code in a Symfony-based project, in a Drupal-based project, in a Laravel-based project, or any other PHP-based project. So now our HTTP client implements PHP Fig's PSR7 interface. It will accept a PSR7 request object, which has all of the data to send a request, and it will give you a response object in a standard format. Another fair bit of work that we've done is some major improvements in our database architecture. So again, we migrated to the framework. That is a huge chunk of code that we're no longer maintaining duplicates of. We've also dropped support for the legacy MySQL extension, side effect of going PHP 7, but it was also a dead extension anyway. And it also blocked us from being able to potentially do other things down the road. One of the things that we're now able to do is implement support for prepared statements. This is a major security feature, especially when you're dealing with user input data. So we now have the opportunity to improve the core security through the features that we've implemented in the framework's database package and by removing some of the legacy code. Another big thing that's changed in the database layer is we've removed the concept of a debug mode. So there's no longer this get debug and set debug methods in the database API. Instead, we've introduced two new concepts to replace that. One is the use of immutable events that are dispatched when a connection to the database is opened or the connection is closed. Those will be sent out by the database itself when those events happen. So now plugins would be able to catch those events and work with them. The other thing we introduced was what we call a query monitor. If you've worked with Doctrine, you might have heard of their SQL logger class. It's kind of the same concept. So you can attach what we call a monitor to the database driver that gets a notification each time that a query is executed. It sends a read-only notification out when the query starts execution, and it includes that SQL query, so you can do stuff like logging through that monitoring API, and it sends another notification out when it's all stopped. So instead of the database driver now internally handling all of the debug and logging operations, that's been split out to its own dedicated API that is also more extensible now. You can plug in your own behaviors and very easily extend this and add new logging and monitoring capabilities that just don't exist in the Joomla 3 architecture. You've heard a lot about it already. The improved media manager. I'm not going to repeat the same things that you've heard already. I'm going to point out some things that you might not know. One of the big things is the component is now Vue.js driven. It's the first example of a component written for Joomla that's using a JavaScript-based architecture. So this also helps us as a project introduce some more modern technologies into core in a way that makes sense. And now that we have a working example of it, this might also enable others to implement something similar, not just for back-end management, but also their site front ends. Whole new world of development possibilities. Another big thing that's coming with the Media Manager is the capability to store your files off your local server. Right now, the Media Manager will basically only read your images directory. But through the plugin system that the new Media Manager has, and the work that's gone in, especially through one of the GSOC projects this year, you'll now be able to store your media somewhere like Amazon or Dropbox or any of those other cloud services. So if you're looking to do that for various reasons, you're going to love it. One of the last things I want to point out is hook points. There's more integration points in the new Media Manager than there were previously. The standard before save and after save events were available in the Media Manager before, but you couldn't really do much else. With the new Media Manager having a lot more actions in it, it's also more important to be able to make it extensible. So with the new Media Manager being able to perform actions on images, edit them, resize them, whatever the case may be, all of that functionality is handled through plugins. So extension developers can write plugins now for the Media Manager, adding more actions to it. So you can do whatever tools or whatever work it is that you need to do through the Joomla interface. It's 2017, the web's changing a lot, and so is Joomla. In fact, we're now going to support HTTP2 resource pushing right out of the box. If you don't know anything about it, it's basically another efficient way to communicate and transfer resources from server to client. And through our document API, we now support adding the required header tags or headers to the response to make that preload work. And it supports everything in the W3C spec. So you just have to add another property to your array when you're loading your media, and you can get that media to be preloaded, or any of the other options through the resource preloading server push specifications. Another big change that we're aiming for is making our platform work with the concept of dependency injection. In core, you see a lot of places where classes are building their own dependencies themselves, and it just leaves a very rigid, very hard to test architecture because you're working with real objects. You can't isolate it. You can't focus in on specific things. So by introducing dependency injection concepts into our newer APIs and working out how to integrate them into existing APIs without causing more breaks, it improves our architecture for not only ourselves as the maintainers, but for you all as the users, because you get a more stable code base. And there's a lot of benefits here too, because we're now opening up new extension points in the platform for extension developers. Instead of having very rigid, very non-flexible class loading mechanisms or explicit new class type calls, you have to push those things into your objects, and through defining interfaces and through working with the dependency injection container, you can now more freely customize some aspects of the Joomla API. So all of these core hacks that people keep using for various things, some of them, I never liked the hacks anyway, but some of them I would say are legit. Some of them, that's the way extensions work. You don't have to core hack classes. You don't have to overload classes anymore. There's newer and better ways to do it. Part of the work that we're doing with the dependency injection stuff is we're also introducing service factories. So instead of having the logic in line to create objects, like for example, this is the method that creates the renderers in JDocument. So all the things that render like your head tag elements, your links, your scripts, what actually causes your component output to render, what causes your modules to be rendered in the right spot on the page. This logic right now is very rigid, not customizable at all. The method is now one line because we've moved it to a new object. So the logic is still there, but through the use of dependency injection, through creating an interface saying this is what the API is supposed to do, you can now create custom logic for creating those document renderers. And it's not just the JDocument API that has this either. I think right now we've got 7 or 8 service factories for different elements of the API, and we're still working on adding more as it makes sense. So this creates a more flexible API for you to build your custom tooling without having to hack away at core. Another concept that we're introducing is the use of a service registry. Same type of deal. You have to register a service into an object to keep track of some stuff. So here's the logger, for example. If you're familiar with the logging API, if you wanted to add a custom logger to write your log messages to a database or change how they're written to the file system, you have to put them in a specific place in the file system. You have to use a very specific class name, and we're migrating away from that logic. In fact, the new logic is the first 3 lines at the top of the screen. The rest of this is all of the existing logic with an added deprecation notice. So the old logic will go away in 5.0, but starting with 4.0, you'll be able to use the new logic. And again, it's not just the logger API that has this. Right now, the JHTML API, which is one that frequently gets overloaded, and the loggers have support for these registries, and we'll continue working on adding more support as it becomes appropriate. If you're familiar with our error handle, you know it's pretty rigid. It only outputs HTML. The document class is broken in many ways, and it's just not very friendly to work with, especially when you're doing non-HTML based operations. So we now have a format-aware error handling layer specifically to ensure that errors get rendered in the appropriate format. So you might still see HTML-based error screens, but if you're doing an XML-based request, you'll get an XML response. If you're doing a JSON-based request, you'll get a JSON response. And with debug mode on, you can get additional info the same way we're doing that in the core templates for like error trace and all that fun jazz. So you don't have to put some crazy logic in your JavaScript AJAX functions to be able to catch errors because Joomla core ain't spitting out appropriate JSON responses in error cases anymore. Now there's a proper API ensuring that errors are correctly formatted for all request types. Another big thing that was merged this week, actually, is the console application. So Joomla historically has been very web-focused and hasn't really offered a lot of tools for server-side tasks, running cron jobs, doing things like cache cleanup, or checking for updates behind the scenes, or the Smart Search Indexer, just trying to think of what we're shipping in core off the top of my head. We've written a brand new console-based architecture using Symfony's console component as the base framework for this. So now there is actually full support for proper command line tools. And right now it actually is written in a way that you can integrate it with extensions. You have to put a plugin in listening to a very specific event to be able to add your extra commands. But we're still working out a way to make it more efficient to add additional console commands to the main application. So in your CLI folder in Joomla 4, you won't have 5 or 6 different files. It'll be one file. And then all of these console commands are now handled in other ways, in a more dynamic environment and using proper tooling to run these tasks. We're making some changes to the component architecture. If you're familiar with how components are set up right now, you know that you basically have to manually include all of the files. You have to scan the file system to find the component classes, and that's just very not 2017 as it relates to PHP. So in 4.0, we're going to support proper PHP namespacing of the component architecture, and it will also be extended to modules and plugins as we get things sorted out. And for extensions that are making use of this new architecture, your extension classes will now be auto-loaded. So you don't have to have all sorts of require helpers, whatever, statements in your extension classes. And you don't have to go out of your way to be able to include classes from other components, because there are extensions that use resources from multiple components, or any extension type, really. Now it'll all be auto-loaded. You just have to do whatever it is to create those objects. And we've also done a little bit of splitting out of resources. So if you know right now, in your models directory, you'll find like your XML forms, you'll find your custom form field, your custom form validation rules. The XML form fields are now split out at a separate resource from the PHP classes. The PHP classes are moved to the right spot in the file system so that they basically don't look like they're model resources. So it's a little bit of logical reorganization while at the same time keeping things working in an efficient way. There's still a lot of feature proposals that are floating around out there, and we're probably still going to get more all the way up until the release. Right now, we're just going to take a peek at some of the stuff that's already happening on GitHub, and most of this is actually coming from Summer of Code and the students that did that work this year. And it's actually a lot of really good things and a lot of really heavily requested tools from our user base. The first part is a lot of improvements to the management of extensions. So right now you have to go all over the place to do certain things, find change logs, manage licenses, et cetera, et cetera. The aim with 4.0 is to have a central core location for managing those extension licenses, for very easily linking out to extension change logs, maybe even display them in your Joomla install. We would just have to work out a schema for that. And also, you would be able to validate that your extension database schema is in the correct state, similar to what we do now for core on that database screen, where you can check and make sure everything's up to date. Web services, RESTful APIs, things that have been happening for years, and core just hasn't really had good support for it. We've tried a couple of times to work on projects, but they never really came through in a way that they were usable. GSOC this year was another attempt at that, and it ended up in an application that we think is actually going to be useful to build upon. So maybe not in 4.0, but as the 4X series evolves, we're looking to have web services support built right into core. So now you'd be able to go to all of your headless type applications, be able to expose APIs more easily. You just have to write a specific integration for that new application. And the last thing I want to point out right now is the workflow manager. So there's often a lot of requests for being able to do custom workflows. I'm an editor and I want to review all revisions before they get pushed to the live site, as an example. And right now we just don't have the tooling for that. One of the GSOC projects this year built that tooling. And they've actually got it integrated into content, so you can define workflows for how your content gets managed end to end, what happens after it gets published and someone needs to edit it. And of course, this API is going to be accessible to extension developers. So if you're doing other types of content extensions, you too would be able to offer custom workflow to your user base. So that's the main things that I wanted to point out. I'm here for another 12 hours, 18 hours, something like that. If we don't get to talk, I'm on Twitter, again, at mbabker, michael.babker@joomla.org if you want to email. and I occasionally blog, but we'll not talk about that.
Italiano o in inglese?
Ask in Italian, see what you get.
Io parlo italiano, però mi piacerebbe capire meglio i cambiamenti nel database driver di cui ha parlato prima. Quindi, I would like to better understand the change in database driver.
Who can interpret?
Something change in database driver was what I got. I think I missed the first part.
In italiano? In italiano?
Aspetta che farò la traduzione.
Va bene.
Can you say what she asked?
In italiano? Ok. Allora, mi piacerebbe capire meglio i cambiamenti di cui ha parlato lei prima nel database driver.
Capire meglio gli elementi di cui ho parlato prima, che sono entrata così.
Sì.
Mia collega sta facendo.
Ah, ok. Allora,
Okay, I would like to understand better the components and the tools you've just talked just before. Quali? Database driver. Changes in database driver.
So,
She would like to understand better.
okay.
So,
As far as it goes with transitioning from the classes in the CMS right now to the framework package, there's a little bit of a class reorganization. So if you know the folder structure, you've got like libraries, Joomla, database, driver, exporter, importer. Instead, it's all grouped by the database type. So like all of the folders are like MySQL, MySQLi, Postgres. As far as the actual API goes, there are really no changes other than the removal of debug mode and the new query logger and the use of the event dispatcher. And then, of course, the prepared statement support, that's all new API. That's not any breaking changes in what's currently exposed. As we get closer to the stable release, we'll better document specifically the prepared statement part, because that's going to be totally new, not for, well, for everyone, basically. Otherwise, there's really no huge changes to be aware of in the database.
Buonasera, sempre italiana sono. Per la migrazione.
about the migration.
Sarà difficile o sarà semplice come è stata come le ultime?
Okay, about the migration. Will it be difficult as the last ones, or it would be better to migrate from a platform version to another, right? Mm-hmm.
We aim to not make it any more complex than the 2.5 to 3 upgrade was. So you should be able to just use the button that you're using now to do updates, but instead you'll do the update to 4 instead of 3.9 whatever. Of course, you'll need to do all of the proper sanity checks, check extension compatibility. If they have special instructions, follow those. But conceptually, it should be no different than a few years ago when you did 2.5 to 3. You're welcome.
Yeah, hi there. How is this going to affect templates that we're currently using, some of the template clubs?
Well, I don't use them, so I don't know. I don't know firsthand. I mean, I'll be completely honest about that one. It's really going to depend how they use the API. If they're using the core APIs without using deprecations, they'll be okay. And then it's just going to come down to how the markup, how they're handling like markup, layout overrides, what they're using from core, etc. Because the core templates are all migrated to Bootstrap 4. So if they're trying to use the Bootstrap 2 based markup in their templates, that's going to be an issue. But like the clubs that are already doing Bootstrap 3, or maybe there are some doing Bootstrap 4 now, or even non-Bootstrap based frameworks, they probably are already aware of what they have to override or get or remove from being loaded in the request, and that won't change. So it's basically, I'd say it's going to be heavily dependent on how the template's implemented.
Okay, I try in English. I'm Italian, but I try in English. Do you think that support Joomla 3.9 for 2 years isn't too much? Maybe clients say, oh, okay, it's 2 years, I wait, and this is what happened with 2.5 and 1.5, sadly.
You're always going to run into that problem of, well, if we support this, people are going to wait till the last minute. If we don't support it, then you piss off a lot of people because you're basically forcing them to either run unsupported software or plan out a migration very quickly. So the aim is to kind of find like a balance where we know users kind of have a little bit of fear about upgrading to a new major release. And we know that it's going to take a little bit of time for the extension ecosystem to get there. Not because we're breaking all of the things just blatantly, but because you do have to test every extension, and you do have to make changes in every extension. And then as an extension provider, are you doing Joomla 3 and Joomla 4 because you manage your code base that way? Are you doing it are you doing just one version or the other version? So that overlap period is really more to give everyone a time to get moved up from core, because we have to migrate the Joomla.org websites too. And a lot of those are very custom built, and it's not going to be just click, upgrade, and done, except for maybe www, because that's basically content. So it's just one of those balancing acts where you try to be concerned about users upgrading too quickly, but you don't want them to run the old software for too long. And I think we're at that point now where Joomla 3 is going to be so old by the time it goes end of life, which would probably be in 2020, that you don't want to be running it for not just the fact that it's unsupported, but every platform that it would run on is also unsupported. And there's just been so many changes in the web that it doesn't make sense to keep running a platform that doesn't support modern behaviors, I guess, for lack of better terms.
Have you ever considered something like an out-of-date? So my Joomla website, instead of receiving an email if I'm running an outdated version, decide just out-of-date.
Some auto updates. Is that what you was, okay.
After a certain amount of time, it should just go auto. Like a year.
Well, I don't like people pushing updates onto my stuff unless they're also going to fix it if they break it. So from a personal level, I'm not that enthused about trying to push for auto updates. And in fact, I'm one of those people that turns them off on the client WordPress sites that we have, because I'm that much of a I don't want people messing with my stuff person. From a user perspective, could we do it Probably, but it would require a lot of changes in our release strategies, and therefore it would take a lot more resources. And I just don't know if we could get to the point where that would be efficient. Because then you have to decide how are we managing auto updates? Is it just going to be security fixes? Well, if we do if 3.8.2 as an example was a security release, do we push everybody to 3.8.2, which includes all of the unrelated bug fixes? Do we push people on that path to a 3.8.1.1 release that's just the security fixes backported? And then you basically have to deal with that for all of the older releases as well. So like say 3.9.1 is a security release and we're doing this auto update stuff and it started at 3.8.0. If 3.8.1 had security releases backported, you have to backport to that. And then whatever other releases, you'd have to backport to that. So it's a lot of logistics. The reason it works for WordPress is because anything that's .2 or higher is basically security fixes only. So it's very low risk to apply most of their auto updates. The .1 updates are a little higher risk because that's usually bug fixes from .0 and they don't do auto update to .0.
About the plugin system, new plugin system, if I want to start implementing it right away or the sooner possible in a cleaner way, not using the legacy format at all, when and how should I head towards?
The container or event?
I want to adopt the new plugin system and completely abandon the old system. How should I proceed?
So it's going to be a mix of two things.
And when I can do, if not right away?
You can do it right away if you really wanted to. So I migrated the quick icon button for checking for core updates to use the new system as a proof of concept to demonstrate that you can have plugins set up in the new way also running alongside legacy plugins. So you can look at that class specifically to see the changes. So really to opt into the new plugin system, you can do it, the quickest way to do it is you change your method signatures from the list of arguments to a type-hinted event object. And that's something like Joomla CMS table or Joomla CMS event, abstract event, or something like that.
Any example available in the CMS?
Of what?
Is there any example available in the CMS already?
Yeah, the Joomla update check plugin.
For those in video land, the question was, are there any examples existing already?
Yeah, so the core plugin that does the update checks to fill in that quick icon on the control panel, that one's migrated. The quickest way, like I said, you change the event signature to to be a type-hinted event object. A more advanced example, and this will actually force turn off the legacy handling layer, is you implement the event subscriber interface where you explicitly say, these are the events that this plugin is listening to, and this is what method or methods should be triggered when that event is dispatched.
Oh, we can't be giving up this easily. Come on, guys. Who wants to stump Michael with a really tough question? All right.
Oh, sure, you change it to a loaded question.
No. Hi, Michael. I just wanted to ask if this new architectural, what are the concerns about the speed and dealing with thousands of articles that in the Joomla website?
The workflow?
Dealing with lots of content and the speed of the loading speed of if this new architecture.
So like the performance on Joomla 4?
Yeah.
We haven't benchmarked it yet. The couple of times that I've just kind of glanced at the debug output just because I'm curious, not really so much trying to like benchmark it and find performance gains. Right now, it's using a little bit more memory, but I think that's in part because we've got the dependency injection container now, and we've got some more resources that get loaded in during the request cycle to handle things. As far as database queries go, there's not really a big overhead, big difference. So I think performance-wise, aside from a little jump in memory usage, it's about on par with Joomla 3. And obviously at some point we'll sit down and do proper benchmarking on that and make sure that we aren't introducing major performance regressions.
Hey, Michael. At what point do you see full web service coverage getting released in terms of a timeline for the headless stuff?
The web services?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not going to put dates on anything just because it's too hard to say. I've seen the architecture that's there now. For the high-level application stuff, I think it's working out pretty well right now. But because of some quirks in our MVC layer, it doesn't quite transfer over as well. And you got to deal, we've got like quirks with J input as an example, where it just doesn't really handle patch requests or put requests as efficiently as it does get and post, and core pretty much just uses get and post. So there's some challenges to address with that to make it really usable. Plus, then you got to deal with other things that George is working on, so he can probably explain this a little bit better. Hi, George. Hi. Still working, I see. Web services.
I don't know what you already said, honestly, but so for web services, we had 2 students on a GSOC project this year. We are building a fully integrated web services application that will be at the same level as you have a site and administrator application at the moment. So at the moment that thing runs, it boots, GET requests work, and to get basic information. And our next stage at the moment is implementing some low-level authentication so we can start working on create, put, delete requests. We're coming up against a huge number of problems in the kind of model system of Joomla. The way you deal with interrelational data, i.e. like how articles are related to categories and stuff, and how you get the data from the request. Because at the moment, when we receive data in Joomla, it only comes from one thing, which is a web form. To try and make it work for data either from a web form or a web service request or even a CLI request, I'm sure Michael talked about the console stuff we've been working on, is quite a fundamental rethink in how the entire model system works. So that's basically the next step for us. Web services is going to be quite a fundamental change to Joomla, because at the moment Joomla only deals with one type of request, which is the request that comes from web forms combined with some data from sessions. Web services are effectively stateless, which makes it significantly harder. But it's a long-running project. It's work in progress. As I say, we had 2 students on it this year, and we have the base application in place, and we're hoping to get some more students in the next GSOC round, and we'll also keep working on it in the meantime.
Hi. You hear me?
Oh.
Do you have, speaking about speed before, do you have any consideration about mobile devices like AMP or something in the designing of the project?
About?
AMP, like accelerated mobile pages.
AMP.
Or the performance of Joomla 4 on mobiles?
Honestly, at a project level, we haven't looked at it in a year and a half. Everyone who was kind of involved in that initial push has moved on to other focus areas or other career fields, and they're not even really involved anymore. I don't want to sound like I'm pitching anyone's extensions, but the WB AMP plugin actually does handle that pretty well right now. So it's not necessarily something that we need to do at a core level, but at the same time, if we could come up with an implementation plan, we might be able to do something with it. But right now, it's just not high on the priority list.
Hi, Babker. How are you?
I was good until you stood up.
Good, good, good. So there's been a lot of buzz lately about Headless. Do you see Joomla going that direction? And if not, how would you best recommend that someone fake it?
What was that first part again?
Headless. So,
if we can get the web services architecture efficiently running, then we can do headless. Without that, it takes a little bit of quirks. The media manager, in some ways, is headless. So you can do it, it just takes a little bit of work. But if we can get the web services architecture fully implemented, then that will really help with moving towards headless.
Are we going to let him off this easy? Come on, guys.
I'm going to keep going until you throw me off the stage at this point, so. You're lucky there's a camera on.
Michael, I have a question. You promised that Joomla 4 will be accessible and AA compliant. Mm-hmm. And we know that we maybe are going to use some custom elements or stuff like that. What's the guarantee that Joomla will be stay accessible after release and when there will be new features added to the Joomla 4?
Overall, there's a commitment to being accessible. I don't think anyone's purposely trying to not make it accessible. So it's just a matter of working with the people that know these things, because I don't know crap about that type of stuff. I'll be the first to tell you it. So it's really a matter of following technology, embracing newer technologies, but at the same time assessing all the issues that come with that and working out the solutions for it. I don't know what those solutions are right now, but I don't think that's going to affect our commitment to being accessible. And as some of these newer technologies might mean we have to focus on accessibility in a different implementation to get to the same end state, but I don't think we're just going to say, okay, we can't make this accessible, we're not doing it. Or on the other end, we can't make this accessible, so screw accessibility.
Can you make some decision and saying, well, if there will be some new plugin or module or something that you will standard deliver with the core, that you say, okay, before it will be part of Joomla, then I will give the accessibility team 1 month the time to test and to approve.
I'm not gonna make a loaded statement on the stage right now, but accessibility team will be involved in the development process. So that includes you guys reviewing it. If we need to make accessibility changes in the proposals, those will get through before we merge at the core. But I'm not gonna make a explicit, this team is gonna do this first statement.
All right, last question's got the mic.
Yeah. The most important question is, when is it ready?
Where's the mic?
Rollout.
Rollout.
What's that?
Rollout date.
When it's ready.